constitutional carry, the idea of permitless carry. Find out more. Go to facebook.com and search for Patriots of Act 746 and ask to be a member to this fantastic group today. Tim, welcome, sir.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing good, Tim. I'm doing good. You've been following the news this morning. I mean, it's kind of wild and stuff. It's definitely campaign season.
I have learned more about politics in the last year than I ever wanted to, I believe. Politics in Arkansas is pretty dirty.
Yeah. No, it really is. It really is. It is a blood sport. Okay, so, Tim, can you give us an update at all on Attorney General Leslie Rutledge? And, you know, we've been waiting on an opinion. Senator Linda Collins-Smith sent a letter to her asking for an official opinion about the penalty if you carry without a permit. And we have not gotten a response yet from that. And I think it's safe to say that we're not going to get one before the primary. That's my fear.
Well, I wish I could give you an update, Paul. I know what you know. Senator Linda Collins-Smith asked for that opinion back, I believe, in January. So we're almost at 5 months now since her request, and you're right. We're probably not going to get the opinion issued, and most opinions take 4 weeks or so, maybe 6 weeks, and this one's been 5 months on a relatively simple request. And I can draw some conclusions. I mean, obviously, I think there's some political implications there. We have a primary coming up on the 22nd. Early voting's already started, and I'm afraid that Leslie Rutledge is not wanting to issue that opinion because it's going to sway some voters. Really?
So when Senator Linda Collins-Smith writes this letter, obviously she's read the law and she knows that she knows something. So what is it that she knows that she's going to get from an impartial opinion, and just what is it we're looking for here?
Well, I'm going to start out by saying that Senator Linda Collins-Smith is one of the greatest supporters we have in the legislature for our gun rights. She has battled since she's been in office, trying to protect our rights and trying to expand our rights, and she knows what the law says. She's actually a member of Patriots of Act 746, so she knows what 573-120 says. She knows what 573-301 through 326 says. She knows the law. And the law doesn't say that you need a permit to carry concealed, and there's no punishment in the law. Now, that's a plain reading of the laws. So she did that request because a lot of people say, hey, we need some clarification. Well, actually, what we need clarification from is the manufactured confusion that our governor, our attorney general, and others have perpetuated, all to protect a revenue stream for the Arkansas State Police. So Senator Linda Collins-Smith was just, hey, clarify this for us, Attorney General. Tell us what the law says. Very simple request, and we can't get an answer in 5 months when there's only 2 statutes to really look at. And, there's got to be some political reasons why she won't issue that opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it would directly contradict what Governor Asa Hutchinson said so Jan Morgan has made the governor come out and pretend to be a conservative or take really what on face value you might think are hard right positions, but they're really not. But one of those was, all of a sudden he says we have constitutional carry, and he uses that phrase constitutional carry because that's the phrase Jan Morgan was using. But his definition of constitutional carry isn't actually constitutional carry. He just changed, he changed what his phrase was, just like he changed the name from the private option to Arkansas Works. He really didn't alter his opinion at all. He just, started calling it something different to save the Arkansas State Police budget. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir. They're making about $4 million plus a year. I don't know exactly what that fund's for the state police. I've heard it's their retirement fund. I'm not sure about that.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts.
and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
You know, criticism of talk radio is not a new thing. Talk radio has been around for a very long time. Talk radio being put on multiple platforms or multiple stations has been around much longer than I have, obviously pioneered by Rush Limbaugh. Criticism of the information disseminated via talk radio from a conservative worldview, again, is not a new thing. This is something that has been going on from people who don't like your message. They don't agree that what is said is the truth, and yet conservative talk radio continues to grow. There are more and more people that are recognizing that, in fact, yes, they are getting the truth that they're not getting other places. And we even see that bleed over into television. Of course, it probably started with the rise of Fox News. This would be the more modern version of the criticism of something that maybe has more of a conservative slant to it. In our day-to-day, there is no such thing as objective journalism. You need to understand that in terms of, well, I mean, when I say that listen, I guess I would say this, because things can get, well, we don't know how this person, to just be honest with your readers or to be honest with your listeners is actually a good thing. So you know that I'm a limited government conservative. You know that Conduit is trying to measurably reduce the size of government, and you know that going in instead of trying, the mainstream media. A lot of times they try to, cloak themselves in objectivity and everything else. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when you hear the Marble Palace criticize Conduit News, this is not a new phenomenon. You need to understand that. This is what happens. And people, for example, let's just take Fox News, for example. I mean, people on the left go crazy. There was a report the other day, I was listening, where there was a student that had an assignment to research some topic, had to research a topic once a week, and he sourced one of his topics with a Fox News article, and the teacher lost her mind. The teacher went ballistic. The teacher started to punish the child because he brought her a Fox News or a project that was sourced with one Fox News article. See, and this happens now. I mean, I'm telling you right now, the fact that there are the fact that there are people listening to us right now that then go on their social media pages where their state reps or their state senators can see, and they start to let's say they post a Conduit for Action article. Boy, it's the truth, it's factual, but it drives some of these politicians crazy because they have something that it's really, I mean, they want to act like they don't have an agenda, by the way. And so anyway, this is interesting to me as I watch on Facebook and I watch everybody who, especially when we're coming up to this primary with Asa and Jan, and I watch everybody who has something just humongous to lose, whether it's a government salary of a spouse or whether it's a salary of them personally. And they are trying their best to find and discover new ways and new reasons to vote for Asa Hutchinson so other people will vote for him. You know, they're going to vote for him because there's financial interest or they enjoy being well connected or that sort of thing. But when it actually comes to the record, and let's just be clear, because of Jan Morgan being in this race, Governor Asa Hutchinson's record is more known to more people than if she hadn't have challenged him in a primary. It has forced Asa to pivot with campaign rhetoric to where he sounds conservative, but of course he has a record here in Arkansas that leaves much to be desired, and that's just being nice. It's a nice way to say it. Ladies and gentlemen, the telephone number today, 870-275-9799. And I guess what I'm trying to say is when the governor or the water boys want to criticize Conduit News or they want to criticize, the radio program, I would like for you to compare them to the liberals that go crazy when you cite a story from Fox News. And that is the same. That's the same. We're just a microcosm of that, is what I'm trying to say. Of the larger, people are trying to constantly. Well, no, this news story over here is okay, but this news story over here isn't. I mean, let me be quite clear. There are times where I completely disagree with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the way they phrase a headline, right? The way they leave stuff out of the story. But then there are other times that I agree with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and I think they do a good job. I mean, for example, we had a story from Mike Masterson. It was an editorial in the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette that were connecting the dots between the bad tort reform bill and Jake Files and David Norsworthy, the nursing home lobbyist that sent him $80,000. And he was asking these questions and trying to connect, and it was good. It was really, really good and helpful. I think that when the Gazette generally did a whole expose, like a whole series on the Arkansas Supreme Court and trial lawyers and how many times they lost, and then they started donating to the justices versus then, their victory rate, went way up. I mean, that's some good stuff. And then there's other things when you can tell, the media bends over backwards and is trying to defend for ASA or trying to defend welfare programs or whatever it is. I mean, you can tell that. And I guess my point is you just have to take each individual instance and you yourself, the consumer, decide. And that's actually, I feel like, what good news is laying the facts out there. Now, speaking of news, we've been talking about primaries and the gubernatorial primary. But there's a bunch of other primaries going on. Now, one of those is in Senate District 5, where Senator Brian King and State Representative Bob Ballinger. Bob Ballinger's challenging Senator Brian King, and, early voting's commenced. Well, the local newspapers up there are very apparently uncomfortable with State Representative Bob Ballinger's gifts in the form of GIF money. So I'm sorry, his GIF money going to Ecclesia College, and his relationship working with Orrin Paris III. And they wrote about this back on May the 2nd. Go ahead and show this article, Joe. On May the 2nd, the Madison County Record wrote about the muddied waters of Ecclesia, GIF, and Representative Ballinger. Okay, and we actually covered this article, all right? And we because it did raise a lot of questions, okay? Now, State Representative Bob Ballinger responded to this, okay? And the Madison County Record printed his response. Go to the next article. The record muddies the water, meaning the Madison County Record. The record muddies the water on purpose. So Bob Ballinger here is saying that the record did, something, that the record here is taking sides. That's Bob Ballinger's contention here. And I would just say, if you go back and read the original article, there are legitimate questions that the record raises about all of this. And but anyway, let's just read Bob's response, shall we? He writes, Mark Twain once said, never pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. Typically, it's not a fight you can win. If the record is successful in destroying my campaign through its editorials, and reporting he puts in quotation marks, I will not be the first candidate damaged by the media with an agenda. On the other hand, despite the risks, when I observe how President Trump supporters respond enthusiastically when he confronts the media, I'm encouraged to challenge the record's editorial writers' numerous errors and assumptions. If President Trump can survive CNN and the New York Times, maybe I can survive the Madison County Record. Now, hang on a second. So Bob Ballinger is essentially saying that he's being attacked by the liberal media, okay? He goes on, I've always made myself available to answer questions from the media. In fact, every question posed in the editorial in last week's record was one I would have been happy to answer if someone would have called. I can't help but wonder, why wouldn't the writers want my answers to the question? Now, hang on a second. This is interesting because there's a similar thing happened with State Representative Bob Ballinger when Conduit for Action wrote a piece about an apparent conflict of interest when it came to Ecclesia being in a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. Well, at the same time, Ballinger working on an amendment that would have gutted the Freedom of Information Act bill. He came on my show, and he was very unhappy with the Conduit for Action article, saying, you guys just should have called. You guys just should have called. Well, the fact is, I think history has now shown that article should have been written just the way it was, quite frankly. And we kind of... reporting on what's going on at the Marble Palace is a messy business, but I think a year later, this FOIA bill he worked on is a big deal, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. He goes on, it seems apparent to me that the writer of the editorial was not concerned with the source of the obscurity, but rather than with the opportunity to use that uncertainty to plant seeds of doubt about one particular legislator, me. It is revealing that the writer repeatedly concedes there is no proof that Representative Ballinger committed any illegal acts, yet that is the salacious unspoken sentiment that the writer conveys. Not only is there no proof, there's no allegations that I ever compromised my ethics, let alone committed a crime, yet the writer makes an effort to assemble a case against me that appears to be based on gossip from my opponent, all while denying that there is intent. Now, hang on a second. There is a public corruption trial just commenced. Okay, I guess it's just to assume that this is all just allegations, rumors, and the liberal media here is just a little far-fetched for me, because we have verifiable facts with John Woods, Mike Neal, Orrin Paris, Randall Shelton. They just had a trial. They just convicted 2 men. Orrin Paris, of the college that Ballinger's associated with, pled guilty here, and it's all over GIF money. Ballinger gave the GIF money. There was a land deal involved. Ballinger, helped with the mortgage or the title work or whatever, did something. And there's a lot of people that want to see those documents. Ecclesia is refusing to turn over those documents. This is not some sort of liberal media attack job. These are people. This is the press wanting information that they're not getting. That's what this is. But he says, let's look at the indisputable facts. The first bullet point is particularly onerous. It references that there were 9 legislators who recommended grants for Ecclesia in 2013, but only my name is associated with John Woods or Mike Neal. Given Neal's guilty plea and Woods' recent conviction, while the writer's intent cannot be known with certainty, the effect is entirely predictable. Bob Ballinger must be guilty by association. Again, okay, let's just keep reading. But put that in perspective. Under this type of reasoning, guilt by association extends to every student, parent, teacher, vendor, administrator, and legislator ever affiliated with the college. Okay. Imagine your own reputation sullied by unproven gossip based on what the writers refer to as muddied waters. Let's go to the next article for a second. Madison County Record responds, and then we're going to go back. We're going to go back and forth here. Madison County Record says continuing to hold elected officials accountable. They respond to what Bob Ballinger wrote. They say, we read with interest Representative Bob Ballinger's response to our recent editorial in which we presented facts regarding his involvement with and the distribution of taxpayer funds to Ecclesia College, a private Christian work college that was at the center of a corruption trial over the last month, and statements the District 97 representative made in recent weeks regarding opposition from the Arkansas Press Association to Senate Bill 373, which would have provided exemptions to certain entities, including Ecclesia College, and would have gutted the Freedom of Information Act. We're happy that Representative Ballinger chose to respond to our editorial, although he questions whether we would have run the response. We would like to point out that we have never failed to print such a response and believe strongly in giving everyone his or her opinion. After all, by sharing facts and opinions, we often reach compromises, making democracy work by allowing everyone's views. Thank you, Representative Ballinger, for your response. Madison County Record goes on. We also took Representative Ballinger up on his invitation to call him to ask him additional questions. We just read that part of Ballinger's response. After reading his rebuttal and speaking with him this week, we stand by our editorial of last week and conclude that Representative Ballinger's actions with regard to SB 373 and his action of directing $8,500 to Ecclesia College have not and do not benefit the people of Madison County. We won't lay out all the facts of the case again, but we would like to fill in some of the blanks from our conversation with Representative Ballinger that he did not address in his rebuttal. Bullet point 1. In a conversation Monday, Representative Ballinger stated he has worked with Orrin Parris III since 2012. Parris is the now former president of Ecclesia College who pleaded guilty last month to fraud charges in a kickback scheme related to GIF funds distributed to the college. Consultant Randall Shelton and former Senator John Woods were found guilty by a jury last week, and former Representative Mike Neal pleaded guilty last year for receiving kickbacks from the college. Representative Ballinger declined to state how much, listen to this, Representative Ballinger declined to state how much money he has been paid by Mr. Parris or the college, stating he would have to obtain a waiver to release that information. However, this is information that's been asked of Representative Ballinger for some time by multiple media outlets. While we realize there is a process to release the information, we feel that he should have initiated that process when the issues and questions arose and should release those records to the public as soon as possible, considering the recent corruption trial. Not to mention, we're in the middle of a Republican primary, and people are trying to make a decision about which one of these candidates to vote for if you live in District 5. So interestingly, if you, it's very, very, again, I would just say to suggest this is just the liberal media, being biased here when we have all of this other stuff that's in the news. I mean, call it bad luck, but I don't know if you can call it liberal media bias. We're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue with this back in just a moment.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
Money, power, prestige, Essence, 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 essence. Available now from Aristocrats Serving Arkansas. From the Nata Rhino Collection. The fragrance of backroom deals. Nepotism. The aroma of higher taxes. Subliminal deception. Deep state. Ace. Made right here in Arkansas by a taxpayer-funded Chinese factory. Communist. Every bottle carefully crafted for you. Gender neutral. Nothing says aristocrat like Essence of Bureaucrat. Essence of Bureaucrat by Asa.
Available now in the Marble Palace gift shop.
Paul Harrell parody. Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
So the Madison County Record writes a piece, The Muddied Waters of Ecclesia, GIF and Representative Ballinger on May the 2nd. Bob Ballinger responds days later. Part of his piece writes, SB 373, this was the FOI bill, or the bill that would have changed the Freedom of Information Act here in Arkansas. He writes, SB 373 was never my bill and never had my name on it. I simply offered an amendment to make it less damaging to transparency. There are people that have other opinions about what his amendment did. My amendment provided that attorney-client communications were temporarily protected until after legal proceedings had concluded and that everything would be subject to FOIA per as the norm. Now, here's the thing, though. That's not how the amendment was written. The amendment actually said that you were exempt from FOIA to protect the government from a potential lawsuit. So when the threat of a lawsuit expired, then the documents would be made available under Freedom of Information. Now, I don't know about you, but you can sue somebody for anything for a very long time. You tell me when the threat of a lawsuit expires. It's a long time. And under that law, if you wanted to protect something, a document that is a public document, if you are in a dispute, a legal dispute, all you would have had to do is share it with your attorney. So if you shared a document with your government attorney, all of a sudden they can say, we're exempt from the Freedom of Information Act now. And this was all done because they were saying, well, our government is at a disadvantage, or government attorneys are at a disadvantage, or whatever. Hey, listen, so what? That's what I say. So what? I'm going to finish up with this because I want to read the rest of Bob's editorial, and then I want to read what the Madison County Record says. I want to read the rest of their rebuttal of the rebuttal. And then I want to talk more about this Freedom of Information Act. Back in just a moment.
You know, it's a case of the governor's perception is his reality, and he's defining what reality is when he defines constitutional carry as you can carry open but you need a permit to carry concealed. And oh, by the way, check with your local prosecutor to see if you can do either one of those.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's not reality.
Yeah, it's Wild West.
That's not reality.
Yeah, so if Leslie Rutledge were to issue this opinion, and all of a sudden we found out there's no penalty for concealing a weapon without a permit, then that's going to make it out like our chief executive officer is diminishing our Second Amendment rights by fiat, by his word, which actually, because I believe an armed society is a polite society, actually makes us less safe when it comes to being able to exercise our human right to freely defend ourselves. It's my
I agree 100%, Paul. I agree 100%. And I'm going to go further than that. It's not just about the governor, although it would make him look bad. Leslie Rutledge painted herself into a corner with her opinion back in 2015. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has actually come out in opposition of portions of that opinion. You know, the police can't stop you simply because a weapon's seen. Her opinion in 15 said that they could. And there's implications for other races as well. I mean, you've got supporters of this enhanced carry that was passed last session that are touting that as them being pro-Second Amendment. You've got Bob Ballinger. You've got James Sturch. You've got politicians across this state who say they support the Second Amendment. And if Leslie Rutledge come out right now, it wouldn't just hurt just the governor, and it wouldn't just help Jan Morgan. I mean, Senator Linda Collins-Smith is in a primary battle. And her opponent is using her no vote against that enhanced carry to say she's not for the Second Amendment. And this would be good press for her if Leslie Rutledge come out with an opinion that says what the law is.
Yeah.
So I think she's playing politics across the board. It's not just about the governor's race, although it is about the governor's race.
Yeah.
But you got a lot of politicians that's going to benefit with no opinion being issued.
Yeah, that is a shame, and I've been people have been sending me James Sturch mailers that are just so inaccurate. It's really sad how inaccurate his mailers are and how he's lying about his record. And yeah, I'll use that word. He's lying. He says he is supporting school choice, yet he voted against it. And if he's trying to say that Linda not voting for the enhanced carry bill is anti-Second Amendment, I mean, I don't see how.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Here's another question. With this whole ecclesia thing, is the state of Arkansas going to make or cause ecclesia to show proof of how the funds were spent? Is that actually ever going to happen? Or is the state just going to be complicit in all this and never seek to recover the funds? That's what a lot of people don't get. Some of this money may need to be recovered. I'm just saying. All right, so Representative Ballinger, in his response to the Madison County Record, he writes, "I must admit the next point is obscenely petty. It concerns how I found myself defending Mr. Parris. I have known Mr. Parris for years. I believed him to be an honorable man and have no reason to doubt it. In fact, I was doing work for the college at a discount because I believed in the work of the college. I regarded my work for the college as an extension of my ministry." Well, and I think that's certainly admirable. If that's what he says his motivation is. The problem is that Orrin Parris pled guilty to being a part of a scheme to kick back money to legislators. And that's tough. I mean, if there's an appearance of impropriety is enough to warrant the media investigating, and that's what they're doing here. He writes, I hold the college in high regard because it supports the goal of work experience and graduating from college debt-free. And yes, part of Springdale is in my district and my constituents from any number of communities in my district have benefited from this program that makes college affordable. And now, Bob Ballinger writes, we find the Record's editorial ethicist presumes to spell out my particular responsibility to promote transparency. The editorialist is, of course, entitled to their opinion, but applying a little critical thinking exposes the writer's support for my opponent. So be it. It appears to me that the editorial is the bait, the election is the hook, and the editorialist expects you to be the fish. Don't bite. I'm confident that the folks in my community who read the Record are capable of distinguishing between hearsay and facts and will evaluate claims and performance of the candidates with an eye for the truth. And as always, I'm happy to answer questions if folks want to give me a call. Again, Bob Ballinger, that's his response. The Madison County Record responds to his response and says they called him and they asked him questions. And they write that Representative Ballinger declined to state how much money he has been paid by Mr. Paris or the college, saying he would have to obtain a waiver to release that information. They write this is troubling because multiple media outlets have asked Representative Ballinger about how much he was paid. While we realize there's a process, they write, to release the information, we feel that he should have initiated that process when the issues and questions arose. They go on Monday, Representative Ballinger stated that he did not believe it to be a conflict of interest that he directed state funds to an entity for which he was hired to work. Now, think about that for a second. That's interesting. You don't believe it's a conflict of interest that you gave money to an entity in which you were hired to work. He writes, the Madison County Record writes, the reason for that, he says, is that he never received any compensation for directing GIF funds to the college. We feel that this, too, will remain an area of concern until those records pertaining to his work for the college are made available. And again, I will remind you, folks, that Ecclesia College is in the middle of a Freedom of Information lawsuit with, I believe, is it Parsons? And Jim Parsons and his attorney, Joey McCutcheon of Fort Smith, is trying to compel the college to do the right thing and release their documents so that we can see how the taxpayer money was specifically spent. And in those documents, I think you'll have the information that the Madison County Record is wanting to know. They go on. Representative Ballinger states that we made him look dishonest by stating he said the Arkansas Press Association never opposed SB 373. SB 373, this is the Freedom of Information Act bill, started in the Senate where there was little organized opposition to it. It proceeded to the House, at which time the Press Association spoke against it. The bill went back to the Senate, where again the Press Association spoke against it. The bill, fully supported by Representative Ballinger, finally died in the Senate the last day of the session. And this is exactly how it went down, because things passed so quickly. It wasn't until, now hear me, it wasn't until it passed out of the Senate and then was amended by Ballinger. Then there was a conduit for action talking about this apparent conflict of interest, or an appearance of something not adding up. And then there became an organized opposition to it. The problem is that Representative Ballinger has said that that the Press Association didn't oppose it, and he comes back and he says that if it was such a big deal, why didn't Brian King oppose it the first time? Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's so easy to get a bill through if you're in the system. And the lead sponsor on this bill was Senator Bart Hester, and he got this bill through. It was no big deal because nobody reads the bills. Okay? Nobody reads the bills, or very few people read the bills. Things are moving so fast. They're passing, 2,000 bills in like 8 weeks. That's what they're doing. And so something gets out, once it gets out of one chamber, those are the bills that are going to be, you know what I mean? If something gets out of the House before it's passed by the Senate or gets out of the Senate before it's passed by the House, that's when people are like, okay, this has made it through the first two critical steps. And people start to, you've got, outside groups that start to read them at that point because they're like, this is a priority of somebody because politics are involved and that sort of thing. So anyway, it's just very frustrating. The fact is this bill to this day, this would have gutted the Freedom of Information Act in Arkansas, period. And it's at this point, by the way, it's not just Conduit for Action that said that back in 2017. The Press Association knows that. Everybody knows that now. Representative Ballinger still maintains, again, that his bill would have somehow helped transparency. That's the most frustrating. I hate it when we get to these conflicts. I really do. I really frustrating when you have one person saying something, the bill's going to do this, and another person saying the complete opposite. This happens in a lot of instances, but it's always, I feel like when that happens, there's really not a gray area there. I feel like one person's right and one person's wrong. I think it's actually more black and white when you get to these forks in the road. So on Monday, Representative Ballinger stated he did not believe it to be a conflict of interest that he directed funds to Ecclesia and was hired by them to work. Madison County Record goes on to imply the Press Association supported the bill by stating that it did not immediately speak against it is disingenuous. The Press Association never supported the bill and knew that it would have been very detrimental to the Freedom of Information Act. In our debate, which can be viewed on our Facebook page, and in the debate in Alma, he made little reference to initial Senate hearings, instead making blanket statements implying there was no opposition at all from the Press Association. When asked about this Monday, Representative Ballinger stated that he was always referring to the lack of opposition first in the Senate, not in the House committee he chaired. Okay. Representative Ballinger stated that it was the responsibility of economic development districts distributing funds to investigate entities recommended for funding by state legislators. He also said he recommended funds to the college in hopes of seeing it blossom to the level of College of the Ozarks, another prominent work college. Representative Ballinger also wished to address the land that was assessed around $200,000 that Ecclesia purchased for nearly $700,000. A purchase of which Ballinger performed the title work on. And again, that $8,000 went to help purchase the land. Representative Ballinger stated that the value of the land increased and was assessed as such just before the purpose due to plans for a nearby bypass. Madison County Record writes, "We will not dispute this. However, Representative Ballinger said Monday that it is an issue that's been questioned by multiple media outlets for some time and should have been addressed long ago." In his column, Representative Ballinger also claimed that our editorial was an attempt to damage his campaign for the District 5 Senate seat. They write, "But these editorials would come out even if he weren't running for election. Last year, we ran editorials criticizing him for his support of SB 373, the Freedom of Information gut bill, which was not during an election period. Representative Ballinger must realize that his campaign does not give him a temporary pass from criticism for the job he's performed as our state representative. His opponent, while not the subject of an editorial since we spoke out against his voter ID law," Brian King, big fan of voter ID, "has also been scrutinized in our reporting. In news stories, we've referenced several of Representative Ballinger's complaints against Senator Brian King, including his poor voting record," which is actually a fantastic voting record, but, whatever. Again, one of those instances. "And his relationship with Rusty Cranford, a lobbyist now facing corruption charges." Now, and it was all Ballinger that brought that up because there was some bill, something about somewhere about bail bonds or something. and Rusty Cranford happened to be on the same side of the issue, along with a bunch of other people and county sheriffs and stuff like that. And it was interesting. I mean, I think if you go back and you look at when this Facebook post was made or when that Facebook post was made, to me it's evident. I think that Representative Ballinger may have known that this Ecclesia stuff was really, really bad and is just going to keep dripping and dripping and dripping in the news. And so Representative Ballinger's the one that initially made these allegations against Brian King. And that's what's so funny. Muddy the waters is in many of these titles here. It seems to me that the goal and bringing up, Rusty Cranford is just to say, see, everybody may be in the mud, so it doesn't matter, right? That seems to me to be the political tactic there, right? See, everybody, just make up any, everybody's dishonest. It doesn't matter. Everybody's corrupt, so it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? That, to me, seems to be the goal there. But, again, you could just really you could just call it bad luck that all this lawsuit with John Woods, the trial with John Woods and all this happened during primary season. But it certainly has brought corruption to the forefront in the voters' minds, which is a good thing. And we need to think about what is the type of corruption that's on display. Well, General Improvement Fund money being misused, that's the big one. Then there's the Medicaid fraud. Well, what I would call fraud, which we really haven't figured out how far that's going to go. Madison County Record goes on to say that either candidate is immune to scrutiny in our newspaper is false. As our elected officials, they should both expect it. We would like to reiterate that Representative Bob Ballinger has a responsibility to his constituents, that Representative Ballinger has repeatedly defended Mr. Orrin Paris and the college ecclesia, referring to them as pawns in the scheme, and has yet to publicly condemn them for betraying not only the public's trust but his as well, is concerning. Our reference to his relationship with Mr. Paris isn't petty, as he stated in his rebuttal. It's a red flag. And Representative Ballinger should be just as upset as we are that our tax dollars were abused by Ecclesia College and a couple of corrupt legislators. And maybe he is, but he isn't saying it. He isn't saying that he is upset as a taxpayer about this scheme of money laundering that took place. Representative Ballinger argues in his column that we attempted to imply he was guilty of criminal wrongdoing in regards to the Ecclesia case. We went to great lengths to say the opposite. We stand by our assertion that Representative Ballinger has not been forthcoming in disseminating information to the public regarding his relationship to the college and his contribution of GIF funds to the college and his fights since to restrict Freedom of Information Act access to public records have come at the detriment of Madison County. Now, it's not just the Madison County Record that's getting involved here in reporting on this stuff. If you go to this next one, over at Carroll News, or Carroll County News, the website is carrollconews.com. Back on Friday, May the 4th, be with you. Recording contradicts Ballinger on failed FOI bill. Okay, this is Scott Loftus writing that State Representative Bob Ballinger last week repeated his claim there was no organized opposition to a failed 2017 bill that would have amended the state's Freedom of Information Act. Ballinger, who is running against incumbent State Senator Brian King, said during an April 19th debate in Huntsville that the Arkansas Press Association did not oppose Senate Bill 373. Now, again, Ballinger now says when he says that, he's talking about in the Senate. Of course, he's in the House, and he's the chair of the State Agencies Committee where the bill was going to run through. But he's saying, no, when I said there was no opposition, I meant there was no opposition in the Senate. Well, apparently, according to Ballinger, he didn't even have anything to do with this bill until it got to the House. Anyway, this piece goes on. Among other things, the bill would have made communications between colleges and universities and the attorneys representing them exempt from FOIA. At the Huntsville debate, Ballinger defended his actions, saying that he merely drafted an amendment aimed at improving the bill. He said the bill passed through the Senate with no opposition from the State Press Association. Quote, "It was crap," Ballinger said of the original bill. "It was a sorry bill that would make it where if you sent out an email and you copied an attorney on it, it probably would be something that would be exempted from FOA and exempted forever." Ballinger said he amended the bill to make that sort of exemption temporary. I can understand that people would have a different opinion on the issue. That's reasonable, but I'm telling you my motivation on it was to preserve more written records and to make it where over the long term we can actually hold them accountable. Again, one of those instances where it just, I mean, the reason the amendment was suspect originally, let's be clear here, is because of his law firm, the Story Law Firm representing Ecclesia in a Freedom of Information lawsuit. Okay? That's why this whole thing was like, that's a red flag. And that's, that was the original context in which Conduit for Action wrote that piece. I know we have to go to break. Madison County record owner Ellen Kreth addressed the audience during the segment set aside for questions, saying the Press Association was always opposed to it. And it went back and forth. We played that audio on our show. But here's the crux of it. There's a video recording of a portion of a March 1st, 2017 meeting of the House State Agencies and Government Affairs Committee that's chaired by Ballinger, and it seems to contradict Ballinger's statements. In the recording, Ballinger recognizes State Representative Andy Davis. Quote, "Brief explanation in a short bill," Davis said. "The problem we have is that FOIA is being used to circumvent a discovery process, attorney-client privilege, when the client is a public entity. This bill would protect the attorney-client communication under FOI. After asking if there are any questions from the committee and getting no response, Ballinger says, we do, quote, "we do have the Press Association signed up to speak against the bill." So, with that being said, now, of course, Ballinger's response to that is, when I said there was no opposition, I didn't mean in my committee, I just meant in the Senate in general, when he's in the House. We're going to take a break because I have to go to break, but I'm going to put bookends on this when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
With public corruption and scandals in the news daily, Arkansans need someone with honesty and integrity in the state Senate. Mark Johnson is that man. Mark Johnson isn't a politician. He's a fifth-generation Arkansan and a successful small business owner. Mark Johnson will make ethics a priority and demand swift punishment for those who violate the public trust. Mark Johnson is pro-life and supports the Second Amendment. In the Republican primary, vote Mark Johnson for the state Senate. Paid for by Mark Johnson for Arkansas.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Okay, so putting a bookend on State Representative Bob Ballinger and this Freedom of Information Act bill that was so controversial, okay? Bob Ballinger said it wasn't his bill. It was, in fact, Senator Bart Hester's bill. Bob Ballinger gets it, and it was a terrible bill, and he even says so, right? And he says, well, I'm going to amend it, and I'm going to extend transparency. Well, what really does extend transparency mean? Now, if memory serves me correct, okay, it would have required the documents to be released after, I think it was 7 years. So in the situation that I laid out earlier, where I said, right now, Freedom of Information Act, these government attorneys, they got to turn over the documents. They have to turn the documents over, okay? And if you make attorney-client privilege trump FOIA, then the only thing, then a college, if they didn't want anything to get out, all you got to do is share it with your attorney. Oh, attorney-client privilege, we don't have to release the documents now. I mean, it was a slick move. I mean, it was a slick attempt to gut our access to documents as citizens, and I take great offense to that. And the Press Association takes great offense to that. And people in the media that, you know, it's our job to get information from the public domain, you know, from the government domain and get it out to the people. Yeah, that's a big deal. Well, so Ballinger gets it, and his amendment is going to say, well, after 7 years, they'll have to release information. And that's extending transparency? Folks, under the Freedom of Information Act, they have 3 business days to get us the documents. 3 business days versus years is a big difference. That's a big deal. I don't call that standing up for transparency. I think it's like, I don't call that extending transparency at all. I call it, I don't know, I said this yesterday, trying to put lipstick on a pig. And again, I'll have to go get that bill. I think it was 7 years, but I could be wrong on the exact amount of time it was. But it certainly, I mean, it's like, well, you know. Anyway, I just wanted to make that clear on what that bill was really about. It was terrible. And again, you have Ecclesia College involved with Bob's law firm under a Freedom of Information Act records dispute over turning over documents. It just didn't look good, and it still doesn't look good. And the press asking these questions is not some sort of liberal media attack job. The fact is, public corruption is in the headlines every day. And because it's in the headlines every day, you know, the laziest news outlet in the world would have to get up and actually start asking serious questions about the ethics of our politicians and those that want to stay in political power.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
They've got Conduit News that is on multiple stations across the state. It's pretty much an attack machine on what I'm trying to accomplish in this state, and their message is getting out, and no one else's message is getting through.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I mean, see, that's just, it's a context thing. You know, they're counting on people not understanding what actually went on down there and the tricks and the legislative sleight of hand that went on. There's no way, if you saw what happened, I mean, you know, that you would want to support a bill that just was it was all a political consideration for the governor so that he wouldn't look bad and veto a Second Amendment bill. And that's why you ended up getting what you got. And it was just sick to me to watch these people just bow down to him when they've got all the authority in the legislature, and they could have done whatever they wanted to do with the Second Amendment, and the Republican majority would have voted for it, and he would have just had to have dealt with it, you know, but they didn't want to do that. Anyway.
Well, we find, Paul, that those that cry the loudest about them being for freedom and limited government and probably aren't. You know, Charlie Collins and Linda Collins Smith both had simple campus carry bills that were perverted because the governor didn't want to sign it. And I don't know if it was because he was getting pressure from Walmart or from the SEC or who it was, or if he truly believes the Second Amendment is a privilege and not a right.
He said it many times. On at least 2 occasions. I'm going to take him at his word. He said it's a privilege, that we have a Second Amendment privilege. He said it multiple times. I know. Allegedly, he's in a private conversation. He said, you know, that they're synonymous with rights. No, they're not. It's not. It doesn't convey the same thing. You know, a right is something that's yours. A privilege is something that is, going to be taken away or can be taken away. I feel like the governor thinks the Second Amendment is really just about hunting, and I think if you want to carry one of those handgun thingies. And this is just I'm trying to channel him. I think he would. I think he wants you to check in with the government first before you can carry one of those. That's what I think.
I believe it's a deeply philosophical argument that we need to have. I believe the governor does believe it's a privilege and not a right, because he believes in government control. I can say the same thing about Leslie Rutledge now, and that disappoints me. She put out a piece on social media about "I will always defend your Second Amendment rights," and she's wearing creased camouflage that just came off the shelf and holding some type of weapon, like she was holding a guitar.
Who is this now?
Leslie Rutledge.
Oh, okay.
The Attorney General.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
And honestly, Paul, I mean, they're pandering to folks like us that cherish our gun rights, and once every election cycle, they put out a photo of them in camo and say that has something to do with the Second Amendment. And they really don't believe in the Second Amendment. They think it's about hunting. They believe in government control. And I'm sorry, Attorney General, but I can draw no other conclusion. You're playing politics with my rights. We need an opinion. We requested it. We deserve it. And you're playing politics with it, and that should have some consequences.
Yeah. Well, if it's been 5 months, I mean, that normally opinions don't take 5 months to be released. You know, when in the press, the standard is when a legislator writes and asks for an opinion from the Attorney General provides it. You know, just tell us what the law says. Oh my goodness. Hey Tim, I want to talk to you about a story that broke yesterday. We interviewed Luther Suter, the attorney, and his client Heath Harris. They're suing Asa Hutchinson in his official capacity as governor and personally because he said he was fired because he didn't hire who Asa wanted. He was a poultry commission and livestock commission employee, and he hired who he thought to be more qualified. Asa says, allegedly. Well, the idea is, Asa hasn't responded at all, but in the complaint, he was fired because he didn't hire who the governor wanted. That's essentially the gist of it. So I'm just curious. You've been, in Arkansas a long time. Is that the culture at state agencies that if you don't, toe the line, that your job's at stake? I'm just curious to get your reaction.
when I was reading that lawsuit online, Paul, I was shaking my head and laughing, actually, because that is so common in state government. I retired with 28 years with the state of Arkansas. You know what? That doesn't surprise me at all. It happened.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, folks, welcome to the program. This is hour number 2. Thanks so much for being with us. The intersection of conservative ideas and reality, where we are building a liberty machine, and we need your help. And it's getting, the Liberty Machine's getting more and more attention as the Marble Palace can see its construction. They're starting to worry. They're starting to ask questions. They're starting to say, "Hey, what's that over there?" That's what they're saying, and we're going to continue to build this Liberty Machine. Hey, joining us this morning, we have the senator from District 19, Senator Linda Collins Smith is back with us. Linda, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Glad to be with you guys.
I'm glad that you're on. So tell us, how is the campaign going? We're talking about primaries. It is primary season, and you have the state representative, James Sturts, who's challenging you, and everybody's wanting to know how the race is going.
Well, the race is going fine, except for, I guess, when you don't like attack ads. I think no one likes that, and if it were not for that, I think it's going great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're talking about the attack ads. As a matter of fact, I mean, I've been looking at some of this stuff. Very dishonest mailers, in my opinion. Sometimes outright lying, but at the very least, I mean, if you disagree with my characterization, I feel like they're misleading. I feel like there's deception. I feel like there's omissions. I mean, let's talk, for example, about school choice, Linda. School choice, a key plank in the Republican Party platform. You supported the school choice legislation. Your opponent, though, James Sturts, he did not support the school choice legislation, but yet on his mailers, it suggests that he did. How do you respond to that?
Actually, I think that's probably one of the most disappointing things to hear for families. When you're deceived and they go vote based upon something that James Sturts said is absolute. They're gonna, when they find out what he actually did versus what he's saying, they're mad, and I don't mean just a little bit. I mean, they're mad. I've had, for instance, especially, I'll give you one example. Just a day or so ago, where the gentleman said, "Come get your sign out of my yard."
Oh, really?
And yes, and he said, he asked for my sign. I said, "No, you can't have it if James's sign is in your yard. I'm not confusing the voters." And he said, "Oh no, his sign's coming out of the yard," and that actually happened. And he showed him the facts and knew that he had been lied to, and he showed that to James Sturts. And folks, when you lie to people and they find out, they are angry.
Mm-hmm.
And people they're so tired of being lied to. And so when they feel like they've just been blatantly lied to, mm-hmm. it makes them angry, and it should. And so I say that to you is that as the days go by and the mailers come out and the audio on the radio station, excuse me, is there, then, and people get to hear that. They get to look at family councils survey after James Sturch has voted against families' choice of a better education, or maybe a needed school offers something for their child that they can't get at a neighboring school, or maybe they want to go to a faith-based school, whatever that family's choice is for a better education. And we've worked on that as the base of a Republican platform for so long. And he's against it and spoke against it. Remember this, Paul. It's the only thing he's risen to speak for or against the entire time he's been in the legislature.
Yeah, and that audio is clear of him. That was the first time he went to the floor to speak against or for something, was to speak against school choice. It's just amazing to me that Republicans aren't more unified on this, because it's such a big issue. And I know it's a big issue to constituents out there, and a lot of parents want the choice. You know, they want some reform and education from the way things are going now. Linda, there's another attack on you, and I think everybody saw this coming. Matter of fact, I know back in 2017 when we were talking about the military retirement tax cut bill, I knew that the leadership, they were putting Republicans in a terrible position, because they said we're going to exempt military retirement from income tax, and everybody said, great, awesome, sign me up. But as the legislation started to be drafted, it was clear they were going to raise taxes in the bill to do that. And a lot of people had already committed to local VFWs and things like that, and it was just really, really mean-spirited thing for the leadership to do that to a group. And, of course, if you stood on principle and said you're raising taxes like you did, Linda, of course, now you get an attack that you don't support the military. And I understand that you have family that is in the military. How hurtful is that to you?
Well, I think I made it very clear when I stood up and I opened my statement because of being attacked. It's sad when you use your military position in everything you do that year when you're going against Republican principles, because that's all you have, it seems like. But, military people are watching that. They don't like it. They don't like being used. And I think this also backfired with a lot of military. They saw that, and it angered them being used. We heard that over and over. I had colonels come to me and say, I know you're not going to vote for that. And they said that was okay. They understood it. They didn't like it.
Yeah.
They wanted a tax cut, but they didn't want the tax cut off everybody else's back. And they didn't want it off of other working military men and women. I talked to a leader, a top leader that had fought for this military tax cut, and he called me, and I think you'll remember doing an interview with me. Matter of fact, you walked in on me about the time my voice broke talking to him in a meeting room, if you'll remember. And we had an interview later on. If you remember, I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, I don't know. I guess we fought for it for so long. And he said, I guess I want you to vote for it. And I said, well, I can't do it. I said, do you remember there was a time you wouldn't leave your comrade out on the field? And I said, that's what you're doing with your other military men and women that have fought. What about their tax cut? They're not getting one. And he understood that. And he hated what happened. He respected me. I respected him. And he understood that others were going to have to pay for that cut. And then he realized also it wasn't a tax cut at all. It was a tax increase. And I have not ever had one person say anything negative to me, because they knew in advance. We let them know it was actually a tax increase, and that everyone was going to have to pay for that tax increase. Even retired people were going to have to pay for the candy tax increase and internet downloads. And do you remember, Paul, I stood up and said, is this not a gateway or the opening to the internet taxes? And the response was, well, it just might be.
Yeah, and they didn't care. And I mean, there was other, it was frustrating. I remember being in the House committee when it passed, and they brought all of these military veterans in, and they had all been told to show up to get the bill passed, and they were all in the audience. And I thought to myself, how many of these people actually know what's in this bill? So when the committee was over and it passed out of the committee, I pulled one of the veterans aside, thanked him for his service, and said, hey, do you know how they're trying to pay for this? They won't just absorb the $13 million. They want to raise your taxes on candy and soda and create a new tax on digital downloads. And the veteran was appalled,
Yes.
He was absolutely upset. I saw it kind of wash over him that he was used as a pawn. And a lot of them were that way. Now, maybe they don't all feel that way, but at least the one I talked to was really upset that they were kind of used as a political pawn to raise taxes.
Exactly, and every single one that I talked to was, and when they found that out, they were so upset. And they wanted the tax cuts, and many of us wanted a clean bill, and we wanted a very clean bill. And I can tell you that no one that I talked to wanted that bill straight out. And even the ones that wanted it were were like, oh man, this is a mess. We fought for it so long. How do we continue this when we know we're off the backs of other people? We're going to have a tax increase to get it. And it was very disturbing. It was so hard for them then,
Yeah.
And so I hated it. It was a struggle, and yes, and I started off, and I prefaced my statement with, I am married to an Army, and I have a son that's a veteran, Marine, and my son-in-law is a Marine. I went on and on, a 20-year Marine uncle, retired, and I went on and on, and then I made my statements because I didn't want to be accused of not loving.
Right, and that's what's so sad. That's what's sad about how voting against the troops or whatever, and that just people counting on omitting the details of all of that. I want to talk about one of the bills that you tried to get passed, Linda, and I think it's one of the better bills. And it was a good bill because it was so anti-establishment, and it would have exposed a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the headlines. So in the public corruption case of John Woods, the trial, he was found guilty on 15 to 17 counts. One of the things that the government was arguing and trying to expose is the concept of being paid extra to pass certain bills. And we're now seeing that more and more. Specifically, if you are an attorney, there appears to be a loophole in the state of Arkansas where you can have a retainer and have a client and pass bills for them, but then hold your hands up in there and say, "But I'm not passing bills from them." But in fact, the results speak for themselves. Now you actually and let's just be honest here. I mean, you stood up and spoke for your bill, and Senator Jeremy Hutchinson. He was the one that one of the ones on the floor of the Senate that spoke against it. He did not like you attempting to close this loophole. Talk about what happened.
That's correct. He wasn't the only one, but he was loud and clear. There were a couple of attorneys that were very vocal, and I think that those attorneys should really look. That's the reason for filing it. I think they could have. It's a wake-up call. But here's the other thing. I don't think you have to have a law passed to know right and wrong. I don't think it has to be in writing. If there were a lawsuit filed, for instance, I don't think that you have to have some piece, we don't have to have a law for everything to know that there's a right and wrong, okay? Just because it's not in writing. Mm-hmm. And so you and I know that if I take money and for something that's in, for a boat, I break the law. And I think it's the same thing for attorneys. I just think that lawsuit hasn't been filed yet. And so I've said that. I've made that clear. I believe that. And then if you looked at the federal laws, at what laws they have, I think you could just look around and see that that's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think
so
that's what the government
opinion.
I think that's what the government was arguing, and we had Josh Waters, an attorney who was in the proceedings. He seemed to think that in Arkansas law there's a loophole, but as far as the feds start looking at this, that it's clearly against federal law to be an attorney and be operating the way apparently some attorneys have been operating as legislators.
And just because it's not got anything in writing, does that mean that you haven't done done something that you should not. And so that would be determined by a court of law.
Mm-hmm.
And so once that lawsuit's filed, you'll find out, is what I'm saying, as far as Arkansas goes.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying it that way. I'm not an attorney. But there is something in us that knows that there's a right and wrong, and we have other laws that are out there that are already go all around it. So that bill was a wake-up. It's like, you legislators, we need to do things right, and just because we don't have it in writing, we may need to get it in writing. You need to look at this. It's an opportunity for you to straighten up things and get it right and pass this ethics bill, and let's not do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And let's show the people that we can clean up our house, get it in order. And it should have happened. There should have been no argument. There are only a few attorneys in there. There are some consultants in there. And I think that was the day they could have straightened that up, and we wouldn't be looking back on this and having this conversation now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
there would have already been a lot of trust restored if the Senate would have taken that action to stop some of this nonsense. So, Senator Linda Collins Smith, I want to ask you one more question before we go. Your colleague, Senator Alan Clark, posted back on April 27th on Facebook. He was just talking about some of the deceiving attacks of your opponent, and he stood up for you. And he talked about how you are the conservative in the race, and he talked about some of these dishonest mailers being the perfect example, quote, perfect example of weasel politics. And so I just, talk a little bit about Senator Alan Clark. I mean, you've worked with him, and more importantly, he's worked with you, and he knows that there is a big government establishment machine out there, and you're working to limit government and expose the corruption. And a lot of people don't like that who are a part of the Marble Palace machine. Talk a little bit about Alan Clark.
yes, and I appreciated Alan for that. I really appreciate those comments, and I'm humbled by that. And I really hope that I'll continue my entire life that I will do what I think, stand up for what I think is right, and do what I think, is the right things. And I didn't go to work for the governor or anyone else that's down there. I was elected for the people of Arkansas and my district. I don't work for anyone else. I have sacrificed my family and my business, and they asked me, they agreed that I should go down there, and you sacrifice a lot. And so I have my strength from the good Lord and from my family and from the people. I try to do what's right, and it gives me great pleasure and makes me feel good to hear from my constituents that Senator Collins Smith keeps her word.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't get better than that. Don't give your word. Don't lie to those people. If you're going to give your word, keep it. But, don't lie to the people.
Yeah.
And so that means something to me still in this day and time. And I try hard, to do what I say I'm going to do. I promise to be a different kind of legislator, and I know that I am. I am conservative. I am the Republican platform. I am conservative, and I really appreciate the things that he said.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Clark and I, like Alan has said, she may not always agree with you, but you know where she stands, and I'll be respectful of them.
That's exactly right. And that's a
But I
valuable.
will, that's the issue right there.
Yeah. That's a valuable commodity. Just you always know where somebody stands. Senator Linda Collins Smith, good luck to you. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, you too. Folks, get out there and vote, by the way. Early voting's underway. The primaries May 22nd. Primaries are now the general election in this state for the most part, folks. So go out and vote. Back in a minute.
It's been said that freedom is in the DNA of every American, and I would say every Arkansan. Our nation and state are now in danger of letting our God-given freedom slip away. by allowing government to be the arbiter of freedom. I agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said, and I quote, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem," end quote. Government is too large, too overreaching, and too corrupt. President Reagan also said, and I quote, "The most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government and I'm here to help,' end quote. This race is about voting for the candidate who best represents your interest, your family, and your future. For the last 2 terms in office, I've kept my promises to you, and I ask for your help to continue to represent our joint values of faith, family, and a protected future. I'm State Representative Dan Sullivan, and the choice is clear. I ask for your vote to continue our stand for freedom. Early voting is underway, and the election is May 22nd.
Paid for by Sullivan for Arkansas.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
Real quick, following up on Senator Alan Clark. Senator Alan Clark is from Garland County, Hot Springs area. And he kind of weighed in. He's actually been giving some endorsements out to several folks over the sorry, my mic seems to be cutting out. My apologies. I've got this button here that sticks. I don't know what to do about it. Do what? It was only for me? Oh, okay. All right. He writes, perfect example of weasel politics. They intentionally mislead the uneducated voter into misbelieving he is the conservative. Now, he is James Sturch, the guy who killed special election reform. Allen writes, in 2015 and 2017, Linda Collins Smith voting record is the third most conservative in the Arkansas State Senate. His record is not even in the top 60. So his handlers want to cherry pick a few votes to mislead the voters. Let's start with number 2 on his postcard. It's a big lie. Obamacare. Of course, Linda Collins Smith has always been against Obamacare here in Arkansas. On gun rights, Senator Linda Collins Smith put her heart and soul into obtaining the least restrictive campus carry law possible. When that was defeated, she refused on principle to go along with what she considered to be a watered-down version. He was silent and led nothing. To spin this as him leading on gun rights is the worst kind of deceit. Ducking out on votes. Speaking of knowing where she stands, there is no video of her ever hurriedly running out of a meeting to avoid being on the record on a crucial vote. When she did not vote, there was a reason. There are votes in which you say, I cannot vote for this bill to pass, and although I will not vote against it because it has merit of some kind, I will not run out of the room either. Educational savings account scholarships. When the Arkansas legislature was asked to fund a few hundred students under very strict rules and guidelines, beginning with the poorest students and families in Arkansas to be able to use private scholarship money in a trial program to choose whatever education was best for them. James Sturch not only voted against it, he spoke harshly against it. If he calls supporting local schools abandoning local families, then so be it. 75% of Arkansans support their own family being able to choose the school that is right for them without being trapped by a zip code. The Republican platform calls for the same. Representative Sturch on the floor of the House said he disagrees vehemently with school choice, and yet he wants to be a Republican senator. Back in a minute.
They've got Conduit News that is on multiple stations across the state. It's pretty much an attack machine on what I'm trying to accomplish in this state, and their message is getting out, and no one else's message is getting through.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Every day all across the state, and it has for the last 30-plus years. One time when I first started back in the 80s, I said that I wouldn't vote for the governor, and that was Bill Clinton at the time. And I was called into my boss's office and threatened with termination because I didn't support the sitting governor. The promotion practices, the hiring practices, it's very common to know who's going to get hired or who's going to get a promotion before the board's ever held. It depends on who you know, who likes you, and very seldom is it actually about who the most qualified candidate is. And that's a sad statement on our government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. It really is. Well, I'm glad they stepped up, and I'm glad that they're, just at least putting their story out there. I wonder if there's any more who will, put their stories out there. What do you think?
I think that it's zero chance of it, Paul, if they're still employed. Mm-hmm. The repercussions of losing your job, of getting transferred to somewhere you don't want to be away from your family, getting reassigned to a job that you don't want, can't do, not qualified for simply because you're not listening to the powers that be. That's a real problem in state government. That needs some reform.
Yeah.
The governor talks about he's going to consolidate state agencies. What he really needs to do is take a hard look at this good old boy system we got leading the state of Arkansas government. We should be hiring the best and the brightest. And too many times we hire who's liked, who's a friend of someone with political power. And it's not just the governor, but that's a problem. When I started in the 80s, okay, I can understand that. But here we are, 2018. You would think that Bill Clinton-style government would be gone. And instead, we're seeing it increasing under this governor. And that needs to go. Yeah. It's time for the people to stand up and say enough's enough.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We are living still in the shadow of Bill Clinton and all of these agencies and everything else, and it does. They just need to implement the reform that the Republican Party claims that it stands for. Okay, and I know we're talking about government, and I know government is a behemoth, and I know I don't think you can ever truly eliminate all corruption. But that's why we need to shrink government so that they have less power to affect our lives in a negative way. But surely, if you get fired because you don't you hire the more qualified candidate.
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind everybody that the Arkansas Voter Guide is out. It is Arkansas Voter Guide. Go to arkansasvotersguide.com to get information about candidates that filled out the Family Council survey. As you can see right here, it's a nice copy. It also had a great letter in it from the Family Council, as well as Jerry Cox, to update supporters of the Family Council on their mission. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about that, we have the president of the Family Council. Jerry Cox is with us. Jerry, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, the same likewise. It's always great to have you on. So talk a little bit about, first of all, just talk about the motivation behind this voter's guide. You guys are just trying to educate the people, right?
That's exactly right. It's an education tool. We do not endorse candidates. We don't tell voters who to vote for. What we do is we survey every candidate running for the state legislature and every candidate running for statewide office and every candidate running for United States Congress. We ask them the kind of questions that we believe the average Arkansan would like to know about. We ask about guns. We ask about abortion. We ask about same-sex marriage. We ask about taxes. And, we print the candidates' answers exactly the way they provide them. And we believe voters are smart enough to look at those answers and make a wise choice. And that's exactly what we're trying to help people do.
I think it's really good, and you can find a lot of information from this voter's guide, folks. If you want to know about it, I mean, it's very simple. Just ArkansasVotersGuide.com, and then you click on list of candidates, and you can look up the candidate that's running, and it's very simple, and read their questions. Now, Jerry, I read the glossy part of the because I got this in the mail. I got this sent to me, and so it came with this really nice update on everything the Family Council is doing, but it also gave, I think, important context as to the history of what your organization has done, specifically back during the Clinton administration. You mentioned when they were attempting to get some sort of sex education into school and pass out,
Yes.
contraception. Tell us about that.
Well, we have a long history, as many people know, of going out to the Capitol. When I first started going out to the Capitol and lobbying for conservative issues, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, and he had been governor for a long time. And that place ran like the Clinton machine, if you can imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, he just ran roughshod over just about everybody out there. And so at that time, his health director was a lady by the name of Dr. Joycelyn Elders, and her goal was to put contraceptives in all the schools throughout Arkansas. Treat every high school kid like they're all going to be immoral and engage in all these wrong behaviors and put contraceptives out there. Well, we said, hey, we think schools can do better than that. We think kids can do better than that. And so we opposed that. And as did a number of people in the Arkansas General Assembly. And it was a bloody fight. Bill Clinton sent 11 of his staff members onto the floor of the House of Representatives. Back then, they could go on the floor of the House.
Oh, wow.
And as one member came out and told me, he said, Jerry, they're in there breaking people's arms, and we have to do something. And so we ended up passing a good bill. Not as good as we had hoped, but it really was a lesson for me in just the power that some people can gain if they stay in office too long.
Wow. And the reason this context is important for the how broad your mission is, and I want to get to this in a minute, but there are people now accusing Family Council of stepping outside of their core mission. So let's talk about a 2003 battle, and you talk about this in your letter, a 2003 battle that you had with the nursing home lobby. Tell us about that.
Well, that was just awful what the nursing home lobby was trying to do to the people of Arkansas. The legislature had already passed a really good tort reform measure. It was good tort reform. Nursing homes came right on the heels of that and tried to do bad tort reform that would feather their nest. It would be a sweetheart deal for them. And that tort reform really had the following elements. It had a provision in there where people could unknowingly waive their right to a jury trial when they admit their loved ones into a nursing home. All those papers you sign, in there, they were going to bury this whole thing of you would agree to binding arbitration instead of going to a jury trial if your loved one was killed or abused in the nursing home. That was one element of it. The other element is what we find in issue 1, which is a cap on damages that you could collect if your loved one died or was abused in one of those nursing homes. It capped it at $250,000. That was it. And then the other thing it did was it allowed the legislature to set the rules of evidence. It went beyond that, though, by specifying what types of evidence would not be admissible if a person was injured or died in a nursing home. And you know what they wrote in there back in 2003? They wrote in there that medical examiners' reports could not be used in the case of a death in a nursing home because of abuse. You can't talk about what the medical examiner said. They said you can't talk to our staff. You can't use their testimony. You can't use a state inspection report where we've found, they've been found deficient. And they said, and you can't use all these other things out there that would incriminate a nursing home to a point where you could build a case against them. They said you can't use past instances of abuse. Can't bring that up. Well, what just scared the daylights out of us is what would you be left with? Mm-hmm. If your loved one died in a nursing home because of abuse or was injured because of abuse or neglect, and you can't build a case, you have no evidence, then you have no case, you have no lawsuit, and the nursing home escapes free. And that's what they were trying to do in 2003.
Yeah.
Guess what, Paul?
Mm-hmm.
They're doing it again. They're doing it again because they came back during the special session, as you know, and tried to run a bill that would allow people, or make it where people could unknowingly waive their right to a jury trial. They put it in that bill, and they hit it, and they almost passed it. Then they came back, of course, or they did issue 1, which is referred out to a vote of the people. Guess what it does? Allows the legislature to set the rules of evidence. Well, you know, the same nursing home lobbyists that were out there in 2003 are going to be advocating the same exclusion once they get the ability for the legislature to do that if issue 1 passes. And so it's same song, not second verse, same song, same verse that we've seen before. And let me tell you, this is dead center of our mission. Mm-hmm. Because how we treat old people, how we treat the least of these that are out there in our society, when it comes to them being able to obtain justice, is in the center of our mission. It has been there for the last 15 to 20 years, and it's going to continue to be there. And I make no apologies for opposing issue 1 and opposing these attempts of the powerful nursing home owners and others to just run roughshod over little people.
And I agree with that. I think you're right to write the letter and the update. You mentioned how a lot of people just assume you guys are an anti-abortion organization, and you guys are, but you're a pro-life organization, and this issue 1 has to do with being pro-life. And matter of fact, Jerry, I actually asked a question similar to that at a debate at the Northeast Arkansas Political Animals Club recently between State Representative Dan Sullivan and Cole Peck, because I was trying to figure out which one of them is more pro-life. And Dan doesn't support the bad tort reform amendment that we're going to be voting on. Cole Peck apparently does. And of course, when I asked that question, the whole debate then became about tort reform. I mean, there were just more and more questions about it. It's a very hot-button issue. What do you say? You mentioned some of our Republican friends are upset with us. They're accusing us of getting outside of our mission. What do you say to them, and how do we handle these disagreements? For example, you mentioned, these 3 legs of bad tort reform that's catering to the nursing home industry. Well, State Representative Bob Ballinger was one of the ones in the special session that was putting that piece in the bill that would have waived your right to trial by jury if you signed into a nursing home. So how do we mediate all of this?
Well, that's a tough one. And, you know, some of my friends who support the bad tort reform measure, we've just had to agree to disagree on that and move on. But here's the encouraging thing, Paul. I've had two of my friends in the last week who were in the legislature who supported Issue 1, SJR 8, referred it out to a vote of the people. They've come to me now and they've said, well, you know, I'm kind of having second thoughts about that. We may have gone a little bit too far with that. I'm not sure that I can really support that now. Of course, it's too late because it's already on the ballot, but it's encouraging to see sensible people out there who are looking at this, thinking about it, and saying, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have referred that thing out the way it was. Because as you and I have both said, I believe, there's good tort reform and there's bad tort reform. Issue 1 is bad tort reform, plain and simple. And so I think more and more people are realizing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stay on message, and I'm going to keep telling people it puts a dollar value on human life. Human life is priceless. We don't need to vote for Issue 1. And I'm going to keep saying that. And we don't need to give the nursing home industry, the trucking company, and big business an opportunity to whisper in the ears of lawmakers and dictate what evidence can be admitted when somebody is injured by an 18-wheeler on the highway, or they die in a nursing home, or a doctor amputates the wrong leg in a procedure, or whatever it is. People have rights, and this is taking away their rights to the past.
Don't you think it's even more relevant now? I mean, I don't think we can have this conversation without looking at John Woods being convicted, Randall Shelton being convicted, Mike and Neal pleading guilty, Orrin Parrish pleading guilty. Then you've got Eddie Cooper, Hank Wilkins, all these people. And what I'm saying is I'm highlighting it's a culture of corruption down there. And if you're following the Woods case and everything, all those moving parts, what you just said, Jerry, to think that these people at the legislature wouldn't be influenced to put in a bill what a jury can consider or can't consider in a big lawsuit against a nursing home. Not to mention, Jake Files got $80,000 wired to his account from a nursing home lobbyist, and we still don't really know what's going to happen with all of that. And Jake Files has pled guilty in the GIF. I mean, I want the separation of powers. I mean, that's something that we need to discuss as well with this, that the judicial and legislative branch are separate and equal branches of our government.
That's right. And, Paul, the things you've talked about are just the ones that we know about. How much more is there out there that we don't know about yet? And I will tell you that the nursing home industry, the trucking companies, big business, have already bought enough influence at the Capitol to be able to get whatever they want. Evidence of that is the fact that they pushed Issue 1 out to the people for people to vote on. They have enough votes in the legislature to get that referred out. So if they had enough votes to get Issue 1 referred out for a vote, you know they have enough votes then to have the legislature limit what evidence can be introduced when there's a trial and get other things once this amendment goes into our Constitution. Because, see, Issue 1 writes all this into our Constitution, and it gives the legislature a blank check then to take away more rights once it goes into the Constitution.
Wow. Well, Jerry, I want to have you on as much as you're willing to come on, especially as we get closer to November when everybody's going to be voting on this. Like you said, there is good tort reform, and Family Council has, not opposed good tort reform in the past. But
we supported it.
We
actually supported it.
And yet this just goes so far that it's taking away citizens' rights, putting a cap on life. And again, tell us when it comes to when Family Council says it's pro-life, okay? Define that for us, Jerry.
Well, a lot of people think pro-life just means anti-abortion, and certainly anti-abortion is part of being pro-life. But my goodness, pro-life goes from the moment of conception until the person takes their last natural breath, and it's everything in between. It includes rights for the Down syndrome child out here. It includes old people and how they're treated in the nursing homes. It includes the unborn. It includes, helping pregnant women who have a crisis pregnancy and are looking for, a solution that is not an abortion. It's about reducing the demand for abortion. It's all kinds of things. It's very broad. But at the core of that, Paul, is a belief, a deeply held belief that's based on my religious faith in God, that human life is priceless. Innocent human life is priceless. And anything that diminishes that is not pro-life. It's anti-life. And so that's why we've said issue 1, which puts this dollar value on a person's life that's been taken out of abuse, neglect, or whatever it is. Once you put a dollar value on that way, then you're diminishing the value of that life. And some people want to value some lives more than others. They want to say, well, this guy was a lawyer or he was a big shot, so his life's worth a lot more than this little guy living out here in a trailer on the highway somewhere. And that's simply not true. Every life is priceless, and we need to maintain that. And I think issue 1 flies in the face of that.
Jerry Cox, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much. God bless you, Jerry.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I'll be glad to visit with you anytime, any place.
All right, we're going to do it again soon. President of the Family Council, Jerry Cox, everybody. We've got to go to break. It's Conduit News Radio. Good morning to you. Back in a moment.
It's been said that freedom is in the DNA of every American, and I would say every Arkansan. Our nation and state are now in danger of letting our God-given freedom slip away by allowing government to be the arbiter of freedom. I agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said, and I quote, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem," end quote. Government is too large, too overreaching, and too corrupt. President Reagan also said, and I quote, "The most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government and I'm here to help,' end quote. This race is about voting for the candidate who best represents your interest, your family, and your future. For the last 2 terms in office, I've kept my promises to you, and I ask for your help to continue to represent our joint values of faith, family, and a protected future. I'm State Representative Dan Sullivan, and the choice is clear. I ask for your vote to continue our stand for freedom. Early voting is underway, and the election is May 22nd.
Paid for by Sullivan for Arkansas.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com.
With public corruption and scandals in the news daily, Arkansans need someone with honesty and integrity in the state Senate. Mark Johnson is that man. Mark Johnson isn't a politician. He's a 5th-generation Arkansan and a successful small business owner. Mark Johnson will make ethics a priority and demand swift punishment for those who violate the public trust. Mark Johnson is pro-life and supports the Second Amendment. In the Republican primary, vote Mark Johnson for the state Senate. Paid for by Mark Johnson for Arkansas.
If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right. The latest story, and when you get to your workspace, pull this up on your computer, give it a read, and share it on your Facebook pages. Because it's it really builds on what we just talked about with Mr. Jerry Cox, the president of the Family Council that was just with us. Headline, can you put a price on human life? Conduit for Action commentary, do you support putting a price on human life? You will be asked that question in November when you vote on the tort reform amendment on the ballot. Under the amendment, there would be a cap on damages that can be awarded in a lawsuit over the death of a loved one, no matter how egregious and how much pain and suffering your loved one endured. The cap on the value of life is already an issue in some primary races. One such race is the Republican primary in House District 53, which is in the Jonesboro area. The Republican candidates in the House District 53 are Representative Dan Sullivan and Dr. Cole Peck. Representative Sullivan, Republican from Jonesboro, is under attack for voting against the tort reform amendment. You know who else is under attack? People like Jerry Cox. He's under attack for opposing the bad tort reform amendment. State Representative Ballinger, when he was on this program and talking about it, said that there's an unholy alliance. He called them unholy, an unholy alliance of the Family Council and trial attorneys. Sometimes ships pass in the night. When an issue is as bad as it is, sometimes ships pass in the night. But anyway, Sullivan's under attack because he voted against the tort reform. A major reason Sullivan refused to vote for the proposed amendment was because he opposes the cap on the value of human life. He says you can't put a value on life. Sullivan voted against the amendment despite it being something that would have benefited his industry and Dr. Peck's profession. Sullivan said he voted against it because it was the right thing to do for the people. Many think Representative Sullivan would not have had an opponent but for his opposition of the tort proposal. Representative Sullivan said, quote, everyone is for tort reform. It's what the bill says and the details of the bill that make the difference. Dr. Cole Peck is the other candidate in the race. His position on the amendment is not so clear. He says he's for tort reform and appears to be for putting a cap on human life, except in cases of obvious gross negligence, he said. Quote, however, I am against capping punitive and non-economic damages when it comes to obvious gross negligence, end quote. The answer that he would not support a cap in all cases doesn't answer whether he still supports the tort reform amendment, which does include the cap on all human life. Dr. Peck began by saying you can't put a price on life, but quickly said, yes, you can. Dr. Peck's example was that Medicaid sets a value on what it pays him for a life-saving procedure for Medicaid patients. His analogy is problematic. The federal government payment to Dr. Peck is not a cap on life. It is the value they place on Dr. Peck's services. Obviously, there's a video below if you want to hear what he says as well. Representative Sullivan says you can't put a cap on human life. Dr. Peck says you can. What's your opinion? Republican primary, May 22nd. Early voting is underway. Arkansas, tomorrow is Johnny Cash Friday. We've wrapped up here. Arkansas, we'll see you tomorrow. Be safe.